I'll just say, first, thanks everyone for coming. It means a lot to us to have everyone here. So many of our close friends and collaborators and artists and critics and collectors. It's nice to have everyone in the same room. Some of you I've been working with for 8 years, 9 years, really the entire duration of the time since I opened my gallery to the public. So it's great. I'm sure you've seen everything come a long way. Thank you so much to Sylvain for coming all the way from France for this and for his collection lending inspiration to this exhibition curation. And Bailey has done an incredible job of putting everything together. And Jane, thank you so much for coming. It's our honor to have you here. My job is very, very simple. I'm going to ask a few questions and let the panelists talk it out. So this is almost the most that you'll hear from me. And again, I really, with sincerity, do thank everyone for showing up. We enjoy this terrific turnout. I can introduce Sylvain and Jane, but I think it's better that, Sylvain, of course, is DSL collection, and Jane from the Asia Art Archive. I think it's better if they are here and they can explain what they both do themselves. Jane? Let's have the...
And the second French character.
Yes. I'm with Sylvain.
Blame it on the French. Hi, thank you very much for all of you coming here. Thank you, Eli, and I'm so delighted to be with Sylvain, a fellow traveler in all of these adventures that we have had over, for me it's been decades. I think it's been at least a decade for you. Anyway, it's very exciting to be here. Unfortunately, I was going to show some slides, PowerPoint about Asia Art Archive. It's much nicer to see pictures than it is to hear me speak, but for some reason there's a compatibility issue. So you won't get any pretty pictures. You just have to focus on what's on the walls. My name is Jane DeBevoise, and I am the chair of Asia Art Archive. Asia Art Archive is based in Hong Kong. We are a nonprofit organization registered in Hong Kong, and we have a very small office here. One of my colleagues, Ali Wong, is here today. But our office here primarily does programming. We don't have a substantial library. We have some library materials, but we don't have a substantial library, and we don't have a substantial archive. But in Hong Kong, and I welcome you all to Hong Kong, we have a library and archive that is open to the public, free of charge, 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. And I would have to say, and I think Sylvain's been there, we now have, and this is going to sound very immodest, but probably the most systematic and relevant collection of materials about China that is open to the public, about China and about Asia, in terms of books, monographs, reference materials, reference books, as well as archives. And I think I was brought here today to talk a little bit about our archiving, because we don't collect artwork. We don't have an exhibition space, although we invite artists from time to time to come to our space, to do interventions in the space. But we do collect materials, research materials. And it's 15 years old as of last year, so we're 16 years old this year. But the people who founded and developed the archive are people who have been involved in Asian art, particularly Chinese art, for decades, prior to our founding in 2000. And what we felt, and we still feel today, is that a place, a nonprofit or an independent place for the study and research of contemporary art in Asia is still missing. We have many, many more universities, particularly in the West, and university students, particularly in the West, who are studying contemporary art. In our history departments, in the cultural studies departments, in the comparative studies departments, history, various places, cultural studies departments. But still, the place, the source of primary material for research, not just material that is circulated and recirculated and circulated again, but primary material, the letters that artists have written, the manifestos that they wrote, the news clippings of the time, places where you can get that kind of basic research material, which many other organizations in the West have, is still not easy in China, for various reasons. And to say this, China has politically changed from the early days, yes and no. It's still very, very difficult. There's still aspects of Chinese history, aspects of Chinese contemporary history that are still not made easily accessible. And what we try to do is make this material easily accessible. And we do that through our website, which I was going to show you right here. But we have a very robust website. So if you can't come to Hong Kong, and I think all of you should come to Hong Kong, and on your way to China, but if you can't come to Hong Kong, you can access a lot of the material on our website. The material is there, but it might as well not be there unless it's accessible. Because the value of research is that it inspires new research. And that's what we're looking for. Stories have been told about China, stories have been told about contemporary Chinese art, but there are many, many, many more stories to be told. When we talk about multiple narratives, and we're going to talk about that, there's so much work to be done. So many interesting aspects of contemporary Chinese art to be discovered, and to be studied, and to be questioned. And that's the kind of thing that we really want to promote and inspire. We don't just do China. Actually, our other largest investment, if you want to call it that, from time and energy, is India. And we have a strong archiving practice in India in our Delhi-based office. We have digitized major critics, major curators, and major artists, their archives, their personal papers, and research materials. And that also is available online, along with some work from Southeast Asia and other places. But we're talking to a China audience right here because of this show, and so I just wanted to emphasize the China aspects of what we do.
I'm amazed by what Asian Archive is doing. And for me to be here today is really a great privilege. Great privilege. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Gary. And also, thank you for giving me the chance to spend, as I said, the time to discuss with Jane. I think that what is interesting is that what's happening today in China, but in many what we call emerging art scene, it's a real work in progress. And it's incredibly exciting to be part of this work in progress, either through archive, either through a collection. It brings me to explain a little bit why we have done this collection. I shall come from an idea. We came from Yona Wilker, who is here. She wrote a book on the collection, and she began the book by quoting a very important painting of Gauguin. Where do we come from? Where are we? And where we are going? So, where do we come from? DSL collection is Dominique and Sylvain Levy. I've been married 30 years ago, and we decided when we get married to begin to collect. And we begin to collect contemporary art. I shall say we begin to collect the easiest way, which was collecting brand names. To tell you the truth, we collected Bacon at this time. We collected Basquiat. Unfortunately, I sold this 20 years ago. But at least I can say that I had a Bacon at home. And then we moved to design. I think we were among the first ones to really collect contemporary design 20 years ago. And I think that we have one of the strongest collections of contemporary design. People like Mark Hughes, and all these guys, we knew them very well. In 2005, we stopped collecting design. Why? Very simple. One of my best friends has a guy called Theo, and I went to him and said, I want this piece. It was a Martin Luther piece. He said, no, this time I'm a Weigang. There is Pinot brand in the Canada. He said, very and I said to know, if collecting is about being on the waiting list, I prefer to play golf. It was better for my health, less expensive, and had again my friends. So we stopped and we just wait. And in 2005 we went to China and we had a shock. My first contact with China, because my brother was moving there. He's now married with a Chinese woman. So we have small roots going to China now. And we had a shock, really, when for the first time for a French person coming to China, when you experience the city, you see such an energy in terms of the transformation of the city. And we thought that art is one of the mirrors of a society, and so we wanted to find in contemporary art, Chinese contemporary art, the energy that we were experiencing in the city. We went back to Paris, and we, once you said something like this, we live 12,000 kilometers from China, we don't speak the language, there's no institutional validation. How do you do it? We had the chance to meet Chinese artists in Paris, Jane and Martina, and they accept to be part of this project. And the first question they asked us, what type of collection we want to do? We said, okay, let's try to make a museum type collection. So at this time, there was not many museum type collections. So we went into this idea. It meant collecting everything, videos, photos, paintings, sculptures, but also it meant opening the collection to the public, and also about education. That's how we began to open also the collection to the public. And today we are very, very strongly using all the digital world to open the collection. When we began this, we said, okay, we try to collect in another way. And we decided that DSL should not be only about object, but become a project. A project that embodies, I think, two tectonic changes. The first is the rise of China, which is changing the face of the world. And the other one is the rise of the digital world, which is changing the human being. So we decided that through this collection, we could be part of these two, shall I say, tectonic changes that the world is experiencing. So this is why we very quickly went into digital, and very quickly we went into conceptualizing the collection. Just a few words how we conceptualize the collection. Just focus on Chinese contemporary art. We limit the collection to 350 works, and we change 15% every year, because we look at the collection like a bonsai. The more you prune it, the more you can have a strong image. The other idea is to use technologies to bring new types of layers, which we never replace naturally to look at the works in flesh. Like with technology, you can create new types of layers and connect people in another way. And this is how we conceptualize the collection. And in terms of how we open the collection, we open the collection by physically being present, by loaning works, but also using all the digital world, and especially now, for 5 years, we've been using the social networks. So this is where we are. Where do we go? I think there will be a question on the future of NPSL.
You don't know my questions?
I guess it. And so we leave this part for the debate.
Great. I think Sylvain just covered so much. I would just like to say I'm going to mention Dominique now, and if it's not clear, Dominique is Sylvain's wife, who has put together the collection with him, and she couldn't be here because Monumenta is opening in Paris now, and their good friend Jane is the subject of it. So one of them had to stay there.
Can I just open a bracket? It's very interesting, you said. We are collecting as a couple. And that's very interesting to collect as a couple. The only thing I can tell you, when you collect as a couple, you learn the art of compromise. And you're still married 32 years after. So if you want a secret of how to be a happy couple just collect together.
Which leads me to my first question, suspiciously, which is for Sylvain, and if you can just describe between you and Dominique, your strengths in deciding together, if you can be a little more detailed for us with respect to which specific artist and artwork of that artist to collect. I know sometimes you have kind of a go big or go home approach, and if you can explain how you and Dominique talk about that together, we'd love some kind of insight into those decisions.
So, first, I will begin with something I think which is important. Dominique and myself, who are French, nobody's perfect, but it means also a certain number of things. The way French people collect is, I think, very interesting because of the culture, because of the way we consider that art is linked with literature, philosophy, culture. The way that we think that collecting is about what I shall call amateur d'art. Amateur d'art means that the process of collecting and to take the joy of the process and not just the object is something very, very important. And also the fact that French means also what we call l'esprit critique, the critical spirit, which means a certain type of curiosity. I think that's the first thing which is important, is that it's a French collection. The other thing which is very important is that we have taken advantage of all the others collection that we've done in design and in contemporary art to apply it to what we've done, we're doing with the China. I think there is, once you decide to collect, you've collected, you can apply whatever you have learned from your other experiences to create a collection. I think this is something very, very important also. And what we have learned also from our experience is you cannot make a collection without being on the field. You have to go to studios, you have to meet artists. You cannot just collect, You have to go to galleries, because I think galleries is something very important indeed. And so this is also what makes the collection different, is the fact that we spend a lot of time also.
Okay, thank you. My next question is for Jane. Do you have more time?
Well, it's interesting as listening to Sylvain talk about his collection, Dominique, and your collection, and I'm thinking about our collection, which is made up of very different kinds of things. And I was thinking, how do we collect? People often ask us, what artists do we collect? Or what information about what artists do we collect? What information do we collect? What kind of books do we collect? What kind of archives do we collect? People often ask us that question. And actually, it's not a very easy question to answer. Because as all of you know, all of you who are in this room know, Asia is vast, vast. There are millions, probably, of artists if you add all the people in Asia. So how do we decide what to do? And I was thinking about what you're saying in relation to our organization, which is an institution. We are a registered charity in Hong Kong. We're an institution that hopefully will go on forever. But we have, as all institutions do, no matter how big or small they are, we have limits. We have limits in terms of funding. Obviously, we're a nonprofit organization in a part of the world where nonprofit cultural philanthropy is not exactly well developed. We are also in Hong Kong. Our space has constraints, but every organization has space constraints. Whether you're Harvard University or whether you're Asia Art Archive, we all have space constraints. And then you have time and energy and all that. So you have to focus. There are constraints all the time, so you have to focus. So how do we decide? And rather than it being a personal decision, or a decision of a couple, it's a decision of an institution. And so, what do we do with that? And I think how we look at collecting is we work with advisors. We work with our team. Our team, everyone in our team is at some level very well connected to contemporary art. whether they are the librarian or the person who works in our PR department. But most importantly, we work with other advisors, and those are scholars and teachers and experts and even other collectors to get their advice, and that we think through issues. But what we're really looking for is places where information, where knowledge is vulnerable, where there are gaps and deficit in the histories. There are histories that have been written about Chinese art, and they've been circulated through lots of books and lectures, and now become sort of a canon. But as I'm sure Sylvain agrees, the canon is too simple. And there are so many things that need to be done, so we're looking for that which hasn't been done. And we're also looking at ways to potentially question canons. And we are also looking for places where material is vulnerable. And that's lots of places in Asia. That doesn't limit us that much, because there are such a lack of infrastructure of collecting institutions that collect primary materials and libraries, and even, effectively museums. So a lot of material is in private hands, and people don't know what to do with it. It gets thrown out. It gets, given away. So that's the kind of decisions we make.
It's interesting. Can I?
Please.
It's interesting because you're an institution, and are we an institution? Yes. I shall say no, and we don't want to be what I shall call an institution. I think that to be an institution for us, or to be institutionalized, means for us to lose our freedom to collect whatever we want. I think that this is something very important. We don't want to be institutionalized. This is one of the reasons we don't want to have a fixed place called museum. Because once you get into this circle, you become linked to a certain number of rules, and we just want to collect whenever we want, whoever we want, and that's it. But, we want to act as an institution. It means that we do believe, like André Malraux in 1948, that today you can become an institution without walls. It means that today you can be relevant when you decide to open a collection. You can be relevant to others, to the audience, if you act as an institution and not just as a person showing his collection. So this is something very important. We don't want to be, I shall say, present by the word institution, but we do want to be relevant as an institution can be. This is what we try to do with this collection in terms of, the work.
Perhaps I could follow up with a question. Last year, last year was Asia Art Archive's 15th year, and we had an open platform at the Art Basel. Art Basel comes to Hong Kong in March, and we use that as an opportunity. We, Asia Art Archive, use that as an opportunity to reach out to wider audiences, because many people come into town at that time, and many of those people are deeply interested and deeply engaged and very enthusiastic about art from Asia. And so we use that opportunity to program, and we're happily been given free space at the Art Basel for the last. Art Basel's been how many years now? 5 years. And before that, there was something called Art Hong Kong, which was purchased by Art Basel. So as long as that's been around, we have been the cultural partner, the educational partner. And last year, Sylvain, you may not remember, but I organized a little conversation, and we called it In 15 Years, ? And we were thinking about our next 15 years, because it was our 15th anniversary. And I remember there was a number of very important people who were involved in that small meeting that we had, a meeting without walls, like a museum without walls. And people over there like Uli Sig, and Jean Sherman from Australia, and various other. David Elliott was there, a very important and really thoughtful curator. You and Dominique were there, and we were talking about in 15 years, where do you see your collection? because we were thinking about in 15 years, where do we see Asia Art Archive? Now, you may not have an answer for that, but that was the discussion at that time.
Let us say I don't have an answer. I have a dream, let us say, put it like this. It comes to the last part of Gauguin's work. Where are we going? This is interesting. First, what do we think is, I shall say, the metrics of success for us in what we do? Because DSL is a project, as I said to you. It's a real project in our mind. You know, it's a personal adventure. Let's be very clear. It's a personal adventure. It's just what we want to do to be happy. But what are the metrics for us in DSL? And now I'll tell you what is I should say the future very quickly, if I can speak of the future. I think that the metrics are very, I should say, simple, in words difficult to achieve. The first one is to try to build a quality collection. I think that's very important. It's still a collection of art. But we wanted this collection to be constantly contemporary. And you know, the word contemporary is something very important for me. The word contemporary is not linked with a date. Contemporary is linked with the idea of challenging the status quo. I think that this is very important. Contemporary is always about challenging the status quo. Always how you can make the present look old-fashioned. This is why we regenerate the collection 50%. The other thing which is very important for us is that we do believe that today what is important is not the object, is the experience coming with the object. When people go to the museums, they are not interested by the object, they are interested by the experience and how they're going to share the experience. So what we try to do with the digital world especially, we try to make the familiar becomes unfamiliar by creating new experiences. Especially now we're working with augmented reality, with virtual reality, with 3D printing. We'll have a huge project next year with these three ideas. The other thing which is important for us is engaging the audience, because when you decide to open a collection, you have to take care of the audience. You have to take care of what you want. You have to take care of how you can be relevant. This is something very, very important for us. And the last point, which is also very important for us, we want to become this kind of institution without walls. And for us to become an institution without walls, not local, but global. This is why we are very, very present in all these countries through special the networks. Just to come, and I will be very short on the vision. First, my first vision is to transmit the collection to my children, to my daughter and to myself. This is a very big project. We're already doing that. My daughter has been in the art world now for 10 years. My daughter and my son speak Chinese. They lived in China. My son speaks, write it, and read it very quite fluently. And so we are transmitting not only the object, but also the project. There's an interesting question about what is the future of a collection. You have three types of situations. The first, which is the most common, people don't give the collection either to an auction house or to a museum because they don't know what to do with. This is the most typical case. The second case, I will just say, is the Ulysses case, which is, it's a kind of legacy. It's a kind of image of a certain time. It's the mirror of a certain time. We don't want to be that. We want a collection which is constantly standing the test of the time, which is constantly on the move. This is why we regenerate, this is why we link the collection with the digital world. Because we want this collection to be seen as a project which is constantly regenerated. And this is very important. We are moving now from visual art to collective design, Chinese design, but also fashion designers. We are going to open 2 new sections for helping Chinese designers and fashion also to be visible to the culture.
Okay. No, it's great, and we're here to encourage a dialogue between Sylvain and Jane, and that's exactly exactly what we're
But
getting.
also, if anybody has questions, I'm always interested in hearing questions from the floor. So don't be shy. I see a number of people who are not very shy in the audience.
Now, could you explain this last comment about the fashion designers a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. First, it's interesting because I should say my background and the background of my wife is fashion. I had a fashion company, I sold it in 1997, and my Dominique's background is about haute couture because my mother has a haute couture. So we're always linked with fashion. And I think that today, if you look what happened at the Met with the exhibition of McQueen or the exhibition Looking China Through the Glass, I think that more and more people today, they are interested not only in visual art. I think today culture is about visual art, is about performance, is about architecture, is about design, is about fashion. And I think that we have to follow what the people are asking, and I think that today, if we want to be relevant, if we want this collection to live with its time, we have to adapt ourselves to also what is the time today.
So when you're saying you're encouraging these designers, does that mean you're encouraging them to be in museum exhibitions?
Yes, I think that first, we have the chance that we have. Sorry, if I'm a little bit longer, I don't want to monopolize the micro. Now, we have the chance that in 10 years, we have built a very strong network of connection. Just to give you one figure, we have now more than 100,000 emails address of people in the art world who are key people in the art world in 120 countries. So what we are doing now, we are moving from not just only our object, but we are producing a lot of content. Coming to what you said also, Asian art is not only about archive, it's also about ideas. And so this is also very important. We are moving from having to being. This is a huge transformation that we want to do. And being is also being supporter of all these new cultural, I shall say, things that people are interested in. So this is how we are moving also by now producing a letter that we will send to 100,000 people every week. We are opening the channels, sending information on what's happening in China to the West and what's happening to the West in China. So this is also very important in the way we are transforming ourselves for the future.
Does anyone else have a question?
Yes, this is good. Young lady over here.
Regarding China so big, is there a reason why you chose to base yourself in Hong Kong? Is there like an art mecca? Because I read that most of the artists live in Beijing, for example. Is it related to political freedom, that you're based, or freedom of expression is Hong Kong? Because the political situation in China also has changed since 2005.
First of all, the reason that Asian Art Archive was developed in Hong Kong is because the founders are from Hong Kong. But I don't think it's a coincidence that the interest in history and research about Asian art comes out of people who were based in Hong Kong. Hong Kong has been a cultural entrepot for quite a long time, particularly as it relates to China. And some of the earliest dealers, some of the earliest scholars, observers of China spent extended time in Hong Kong, or actually lived in Hong Kong. Because for the longest time, Hong Kong was a gateway to China. But it was also a place where, under British rule, and then after 1997, under its semi-autonomous status, or its administrative status, it has been relatively free of certain kinds of political or social constraints. And so the fact that there was one, people interested in Chinese culture, and second of all, people who had been involved for a very long time under a stable economic and political regime. And then third, had the interest in collecting this kind of very non-marketable type of material. This is not about the art market. None of these things have market value, really. None of the material in our collection. I think it comes together. And I still think today, because we work very closely with universities in China, whether it's Beijing University or Hangzhou University or Guangdong University, we work with the artists. The artists are our biggest supporters. I think it's really important to say that we're not distanced, we don't have a distance from the contemporary art scene in China right now. The artists in China are our biggest supporters, and they are our biggest financial supporters, as well as donors of material. Our archives come from artists. Our archives come from people working in China who have been working there. But they give it to us, and they trust us, and they help support the organization financially because they think it's so important, and they know right now, it may not be in the future, but right now, and that's true, has been true for the last 15 years, that it's still very difficult to find institutions or organizations in China that have the interest to do something like this, and perhaps the ability to provide a platform for uncensored information still. The universities know that. China is a complicated place. It's very, very large. But at the end of the day, their access to material about 1980s, for example, which is not that long ago, access to personal papers about art developments during that time, is still something that's, from an institutional perspective, is not yet able to be organized and then made publicly accessible. They know that we can do that. They want their histories kept. They want independent research. They want a different kind of validation than the art market can give them. They understand that that's a lack. So I think Hong Kong still plays a role, but that wasn't the reason. There wasn't the reason. We weren't escaping any political issues. Hong Kong still plays a very important role as being an independent place in China for this kind of material.
I would like to add two things. First, my experience is that the more I go to China, the more I know that I don't know. So what I'm going to tell you is just a point of view, and perhaps it's not the right point of view. But I think that we have to take into account two things for me, my experience with China. First, you should never forget that 1990 is the first gallery in China. 1993, the first auction house. So it means the whole ecosystem in China of contemporary art is in process. So you can never compare what's happening in the West with what's happening in China in terms of the process and the stage of the ecosystem. I think this is something very, very important, is that we are not dealing with the same, even if time is not the same in China and in the West, but it's still very different in terms of the process. I think that's also something very interesting. How is the government looking at contemporary art? It's a very interesting question. For the government today, contemporary art is more considered as a creative industry. And we have a lot of debate with some Chinese friends. And I say that what's happening today will be tomorrow culture and heritage. And in a very, I should say, direct way, the answer no, it's not culture and heritage. What's happening today is culture garbage. When we speak of Chinese contemporary art. So, the idea of contemporary art in China is still something very difficult for the government to have a very clear policy. The government is very Chinese way. It means that it allows things to happen, but it's not always supporting things to happen. It means that it leaves people do things, but they have to fix themselves the limits, their own limit in terms of censorship. And this is also very interesting, is that, but in the other hand, They know that contemporary art is a very strong soft power tool, especially with the West. And so they encourage, in a certain way, the visibility of Chinese contemporary art in the West. So it's a very complicated situation. And Hong Kong has a very special position because it can place, the Chinese government can play with, I shall say, all these types of different faces of what is today contemporary art. And this is it's a very interesting game today on how contemporary art is evolving today in China.
Great.
We have a question back there, and, oh, okay, Sylvain. Yes?
If there's still time. I just,
Yes.
I was wondering, regarding the DSL collection and the collecting process, you've talked a lot about how you've noticed how Chinese contemporary art has changed over time and how it's evolved. And you've been collecting for such a long time. Have you noticed how your own collecting processes change the more you become familiar with Chinese culture and Chinese art? Has there been anything, a change of direction that you feel the more you're familiar with something, you tend to perhaps prefer a certain type of art?
I think that, but the answer, the best answer would be given by Jane, because she has been involved with Chinese contemporary art for much longer than I will try to sum up in I should say, in one sentence how things are moved. It's always trying, it's always a challenge to try to encapsulate in one sentence how things move. I like this kind of speed dating way to look at things. I think that, for me, if you are ask an artist today, a Chinese artist, what he is, he will say, I'm an artist creating in China. I'm no more a Chinese artist. And I think this is the biggest, I shall say, transformation today, happening today in the Chinese contemporary art, especially all the young artists. Today, they are global, which was not existing 5 years ago, 10 years ago. They were Chinese, and they were playing with their Chineseness to try to enter into the market of the Western people. But today, for them, they are very strongly rooted with China. They are very strongly influenced by the Chinese, I should say, environment, but they don't want to be considered today as Chinese artists. This is how I feel today. And if you look at the works here, are they Chinese? Not sure. It could be a Western artist. And you have a very good illustration on how the art world in China is moving today. But I think Jane has a better answer than myself.
Xiaoming?
The question I believe the field for years, and I'm quite confused how I can, when looking at contemporary art, contemporary production, and the artist disassociation with the society, with some of the social issues that's taking place in China. I remember the 90s that if I met Xu Bing and Cai Guoqiao, or they did not want to say they're Chinese artists. When the market took off, they all identified them as Chinese artists. So now we're seeing this contemporary artists, new contemporary artists, are making, how they, say whether they're, what is international artists? When you don't have the connections back to your own nationality and what is the spirit and essence in their artworks. So I'm quite confused looking at the contemporary collection. And anyways, I'm going to hear your opinion on it.
Well, I think that's a very large question, and I think Xiaoming has put her finger on a very big issue. We don't have a whole lot of time here, but let me just say there's a couple of things that I've picked up from the conversations, particularly maybe your gallery director or your curator who talked about the show that we have, and now we're looking at the artwork on the walls, and I think it's absolutely certain that if you walked into this gallery and you looked at the work on the walls and you weren't told that they were Chinese, you would never know they were Chinese. But let's think about that question a bit. What do you think they are? You think they're global? You think they're, what does that mean? Is global just another word for Western? There's a lot of issues around the hierarchy of culture. We talk about politics. We talk about how the Chinese artists don't wear the baggage anymore of the Cultural Revolution and their communist past. But what is the new politics that they've taken on? Where is that coming from? I think we need to think about the politics of capitalism and what it says about what we see on the walls here. And I'm not diminishing the striving, the ambition, the authenticity, the desire, the skepticism, the questioning that these young artists are bringing to their practice. But we've got to think about what world are they in, what roles do they see, and that they're trying to play by. That's not a right or wrong, but I think it's very important to think about.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jane, but I think it's not only the Chinese artists. I think all the contemporary artists today are from this kind of trend to be, like I shall say, have been absorbed by whatever you call the market, whatever. I think that if you look at Middle East artists, or if you look at even American artists, or Western French artists, or Chinese artists, I think there is a kind of there is no more about nationalities, no more about movements. It's about something much more, I shall say, linked with the world in which we live, and the world in which we live is mainly governed by numbers and by numbers of dollars, and that's it. It's just a fact. We just have to notice that. Is it more important in China than the other worlds? I don't think so. I think it's just you will have diversity in China. You will have artists who are still very rooted to their tradition and history. You will have artists linked to something different. Art is about diversity, and I think that's today diversity is something important even today in China. That's how I perceive my experience today in China compared to as it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
But then it comes down to the quality, and that's very much been pulled down by the global dollar value. You don't see very many good artists because of that, in my opinion. I'd like you to comment on that.
You know, I understand definitely understand where you're coming from, sir, and Sylvain. But my question to you is, I think there are a lot of good artists out there, but you may not see them in the auction market. You have to look for them in a different place, because there's a wonderful, I'll bastardize his quote, but my feeling is that self-determination, freedom, independence is what makes great artists. And those artists who go find work with the market, not necessarily bad artists, but I think it's really important that that sense of independence, that sense of questioning, that sense of resistance to mainstream, that sense of resistance to mainstream politics, whether it's politics or systems, is still something that is important to keep art fresh and keep it contemporary. Those artists do exist. They're out there. You just might have to look for them in different places rather than looking for them in the auction market. And I'm not suggesting that's just where you're looking, but I am very optimistic about the art scene. I'm extremely optimistic. There are incredibly energetic young people. Perhaps we're just not looking in the right places if in fact we feel that the quality has diminished, because I think there's some very, very important, strong, and independent artists out there, but they may not be doing art market art.
I think that you've put the finger on a very important question. How do we choose an artwork and enter into the collection? And especially when you limit the collection to 350 works, how do you choose the work? I'll be very direct with you. We don't choose an artist, we choose an artwork. What is important for us is, what is for us a good artwork? A good artwork for me is an artwork which challenges me, which is, can be aesthetic, but which make me think. You know, Michel Serres is a French philosopher. He said, the human being is a container of ideas and emotion. And a good artwork can be a key to open this container. And we are much more interested by an artwork than by the name of the artist. And if you look at the collection, we have very strong artwork from artists that nobody knows. Nobody knows. And we think that if you want to have a collection which stands the test of the time, you have to look at works which, I shall say, will not fade like flowers, because they are linked with the trends, or they are linked with market, or they are linked with the name of an artist. So for us, you speak of artists, I speak of artwork. I'm not interested by artists.
With that, you have to have an extraordinarily good eye and a great history of art going way back and place it in that context. But it's basically the eye, and there are very few people who have it.
You know, I don't know if I have a good eye. What I know is that I accept my mistakes. It's a personal adventure. If I am an institution, I will be obliged to collect whatever is the best, knowing that the best, I don't know who is capable to know what is the best, because the best change every time. The trends change, the curriculum change, and what is the best today will not be the best tomorrow, and what was the best yesterday could be the best in the future. So, you know, the idea of trying to have a metric about the good works, I don't have the capability to do it. What I want is something which makes me happy. I think that I used to say, you know, a collection is a way for an ordinary person to have an extraordinary life. And that's it. I'm not trying to build history, or to write history. This is just my opinion.
I love that.
So I think we can wind down. Thanks again, everyone, for coming. We have a reception now for the opening of this show until 4 o'clock. So you're welcome to stay and eat and drink and have fun.